Imagine being forced to perform just so people can laugh at you, only to leave them absolutely stunned. This is the true story of Malik, a 13-year-old boy who turned humiliation into a standing ovation. What happened next will give you chills. Stay tuned, you won't believe their faces when he finished playing. Play something, if you even can. The words sliced through the music room like a cold blade, sharp enough to silence the faint hum of the ceiling fan. 13-year-old Malik Carter froze on the worn piano bench, his back straight but his heart hammering so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. Dozens of curious eyes locked on him, students, teachers, and even the janitor who had paused at the doorway. The bright afternoon sunlight poured through the tall, old windows, yet the warmth didn't touch him. It felt like a harsh spotlight, burning him alive. The navy blue Crestwood Academy blazer, which had looked so crisp in the mirror that morning, now felt 2 sizes too small. His tie, perfectly knotted before class, seemed to tighten with every tick of the clock. Malik swallowed hard, trying to ignore the prickling sensation crawling up the back of his neck. Crestwood Academy wasn't just any school, it was the school in the city. Its music program attracted the best young talent, prodigies who had been taking lessons since they could walk, students whose parents hired private tutors from world-class conservatories. Malik was none of those things. He was the scholarship kid from a neighborhood the Crestwood crowd only read about in the news. Music, however, had always been in his blood. His grandmother, a retired jazz pianist, had filled his childhood with the sound of rolling blues chords and smooth improvisations. Malik had learned piano on a second-hand keyboard in a small living room that smelled of coffee and old sheet music. He knew he belonged at a piano, but convincing everyone else was a different story. Since his first day at Crestwood, Malik had felt the weight of quiet judgment. Some teachers offered polite smiles, but others barely hid their skepticism. None more so than Ms. Dalton, the choir director. She was a tall woman with perfectly styled silver hair and a reputation for breaking down even the most confident students. She valued discipline, precision, and pedigree, things she didn't think Malik possessed. Today's choir rehearsal had started like any other. Scales, warm-ups, a few clumsy harmonies. Malik had sat quietly near the piano, keeping to himself, waiting for his turn to accompany the group as assigned. Then Ms. Dalton's sharp eyes landed on him. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice smooth as glass but cold as ice. "Why don't you show us what you can do on the piano?" It sounded like an invitation, but Malik heard the challenge beneath it. I thought I was just accompanying today," he said carefully. "Oh, come now." Ms. Dalton's lips curved into a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Surely you can manage something without preparation. A real musician can." The other teachers lined up behind her like a silent jury. Mr. Peters crossed his arms. Ms. Whitfield raised a brow. A couple of students exchanged whispers and muffled laughs. Their expressions weren't curious, they were expectant, almost eager. Malik's palms grew slick. He knew that tone in Ms. Dalton's voice. It wasn't encouragement. It was a dare. His mind flashed with doubts. What if I mess up? What if they laugh? What if they use this to prove I don't belong here? The room seemed to shrink as his heartbeat filled his ears. He could almost hear his grandmother's voice urging him to breathe, to trust himself. But fear rooted him to the bench. The piano's glossy black surface reflected his nervous face back at him. The keys waited, silent and accusing. Ms. Dalton tilted her head slightly, the corners of her mouth twitching as if she were holding back a smirk. "Any day now," she said lightly, though her eyes gleamed with impatience. The other teachers remained motionless, arms crossed like stone statues. A few students at the back stifled small, skeptical smiles. Malik's heart pounded harder. They weren't expecting music. They were expecting failure. Malik's fingers hovered above the piano keys, trembling just enough for him to notice. The gleaming black and white patterns seemed to blur under the harsh classroom lights. He could feel every breath of the room, the creak of a chair, the faint rustle of someone shifting their weight, the expectant silence hanging heavy like a curtain. "Breathe," he told himself. In the swirl of nerves, his grandmother's voice rose in his memory, clear and steady. When they doubt you, baby, let your gifts speak louder than words. Music is your truth, nobody can take that from you. It wasn't just a nice saying. Malik had lived those words. On nights when the world outside his window rumbled with sirens, he and Grandma Rosa would sit together at the old upright piano in their living room. She'd play low, rolling blues lines, and he'd copy them until his small fingers found their own rhythm. She used to smile and say, "Every note has a story. Tell yours, and people will listen." Music wasn't just something Malik liked. It was the language of his heart, the place where fear dissolved and he could be fully himself. But here, at Crestwood Academy, that safe language felt like it was on trial. The tension in the room pressed in on him. He could almost hear the unspoken thoughts of his classmates. He probably can't play. Just a scholarship kid. Out of his league. Their stares prickled his skin like tiny sparks. Behind him, Miss Dalton tapped her heel against the wooden floor. Tap, tap, tap. A subtle reminder that she was waiting, that time was running out. Malik tightened his jaw. For a brief, angry moment he considered walking out, standing up and leaving the piano bench empty, letting them believe whatever they wanted. Why should he prove anything to people who had already decided who he was? But another memory surfaced, his grandmother's hands guiding his on the keys, her warm laughter filling the room when he finally nailed a tricky chord progression. She had given him music as a gift, not as something to hide. "This is yours," he reminded himself. "No one can take this away." He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs until the tightness in his chest eased. The scent of polished wood and sheet music mingled in the air. The piano keys beneath his fingers felt cool, steady, familiar, like greeting an old friend. The room remained silent, waiting. Miss Dalton's eyes were sharp, her arms still crossed. The other teachers looked half curious, half dismissive. Somewhere in the back, a student stifled a giggle, quickly hushed by the stillness. Malik let his shoulders drop. He didn't have to speak. He didn't have to explain. His answer would come through the music. Another deep breath. His hands settled onto the keys with a soft click. The faintest tremor still lingered, but it no longer scared him. He pictured the old living room at home, the frayed rug, the chipped coffee table, Grandma Rosa humming along as he played. That memory wrapped around him like a shield. He exhaled slowly, clearing every distraction from his mind. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a voice, his voice. And in that quiet moment, Malik chose to speak. With the tiniest nod to himself, he pressed the first note. The first note floated into the air like a soft breeze, gentle but alive, carrying a quiet confidence that immediately shifted the room's energy. It was a single, lingering tone that made people lean in rather than pull back. The faint giggles at the back of the room died instantly. Even the squeak of a chair leg from a restless student stilled. Malik's fingers moved to the next chord, and then the next, weaving them together in a smooth, bluesy pattern that pulsed like a heartbeat. He began with something familiar to him, a slow, soulful melody his grandmother loved, one that told a story without a single word. The warm, low notes wrapped around the room like a comforting blanket. Each tone resonated with a depth far beyond his 13 years, carrying echoes of late-night practice sessions, of laughter and struggle, of quiet determination. As the melody grew, so did his courage. Malik felt the shift inside himself, an electric connection between his thoughts and the keys. His earlier nervousness melted into pure focus. The piano wasn't a test anymore, it was home. He slid into a more complex rhythm, fingers gliding effortlessly across octaves. His left hand drove a deep, steady bass while his right hand danced freely, sprinkling high notes like sparks. The contrast created a richness that filled the music room wall to wall. Every eye remained fixed on him. Miss Dalton, who just moments ago looked impatient and smug, now stood motionless, her lips slightly parted. The other teachers leaned forward almost unconsciously. Even a late afternoon sunbeam seemed to pause, casting a golden glow across the polished piano lid. Malik closed his eyes for a moment, letting instinct take over. Without sheet music, he shifted into a brighter, jazz-infused improvisation, his fingers moving so fast they became a blur. The rhythm bounced and swayed, playful and daring. It was the kind of performance that made you tap your foot without realizing it. Inside his mind, the room transformed into his grandmother's cozy living room. He could hear her soft humming as she listened to him play late into the night. That memory guided him like a lighthouse, steady and warm. Then, almost on a dare to himself, Malik pivoted again. He moved seamlessly from a lively jazz back to a classical style, borrowing a few grand flourishes from Beethoven and layering them with his own creative twists. Each change of tempo and mood felt like a conversation, first tender, then bold, then triumphant. The piano sang with him, every note crisp and clear. Malik felt powerful but calm, as if the music itself carried him forward. Time seemed to blur. The room, the teachers, the stairs, all of it faded into the background. Finally, he built toward a sweeping crescendo. His arms moved with elegant force, striking the last chords with a confidence that filled every corner of the room. The sound echoed, rich and resonant, then slowly decayed into silence. For a moment, there was nothing, no movement, no breath. The quiet was so complete that Malik could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock behind him. Then he opened his eyes. Miss Dalton's expression was unreadable. Her arms had dropped to her sides, and the sharp edge in her posture had softened. Around her, the other teachers exchanged wide-eyed glances, as if they weren't sure what they had just witnessed. The classmates who had giggled earlier now sat frozen, mouths slightly open. Malik let his hands rest lightly on the keys. He didn't smile, didn't bow. He simply met their stunned faces with a calm, steady gaze. The room remained silent, not from indifference but from awe. Malik had spoken, and his music had said everything. The final chords still shimmered in the air when the room descended into a hush so complete it felt sacred. The faint ticking of the wall clock suddenly seemed thunderous. For a heartbeat, Malik wondered if anyone would speak at all, or if they were all still catching their breath the way he was. Miss Dalton's mouth hung slightly open, her eyes wide behind her glasses. She didn't look like the sharp, unshakable choir director anymore. Instead, she looked almost lost. The other teachers shifted, their earlier crossed arms now hanging awkwardly at their sides. It was as if Malik's music had stripped away the thin armor of skepticism they wore like uniforms. Finally, Mr. Peters, the assistant music instructor known for his strict critiques, whispered, almost reverently, that was extraordinary. His voice cracked the silence like a delicate bell. Miss Dalton blinked, seeming to wake from a trance. Her voice faltered, surprising even herself. She cleared her throat and tried again, softer this time. Where did you learn to play like that? Malik's heart was still racing, but he felt an unexpected steadiness in his voice. My grandmother taught me, he said simply, his gaze meeting hers without flinching. A flicker of something, respect? Regret, passed over Miss Dalton's face. She stepped closer to the piano, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Your grandmother, she repeated, as though tasting the word. She must be remarkable. She is, Malik said, a small but genuine smile breaking through. Around them, the students slowly emerged from their stunned silence. A few began to clap hesitantly, then more joined in until the room filled with an enthusiastic applause that bounced off the music room walls. Some of the same classmates who had giggled earlier now looked at Malik with wide-eyed admiration, their cheers rising above the clapping. Malik felt a rush of warmth that had nothing to do with the sun streaming through the tall windows. He'd walked into this room as a target of quiet ridicule and disbelief, but he had left them with something undeniable. Miss Dalton held up a hand, and the applause faded. She took a slow breath before speaking again. Malik, she said carefully, her earlier sharpness completely gone, I owe you an apology. The room went still again. Even the students seemed surprised. I asked you to play because she paused, searching for the right words. Because I wasn't sure you belonged in this program. That was wrong of me. Malik blinked, absorbing the rare confession. You don't just belong here, Ms. Dalton continued, her voice firming with conviction. You elevate this entire room. Your talent, your poise, it's remarkable. For a long moment, their eyes met. The tension that had hung between them since the start of the semester seemed to dissolve, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect. Mr. Peters stepped forward, smiling now. You should be performing in the fall showcase. We'd be lucky to have you. Several students nodded eagerly, and someone whispered, he has to play at the showcase. Malik's chest swelled, not with arrogance but with the deep, satisfying recognition that he had earned this moment, not through arguing, not through proving anyone wrong with words, but by letting his music speak louder than every doubt in the room. As the students began to file out, their chatter buzzing with excitement, Ms. Dalton placed a hand lightly on Malik's shoulder. Your grandmother must be very proud, she said softly. Malik thought of Grandma Rosa, of late nights spent at the old piano, of her gentle voice guiding him through every chord. A smile spread across his face. She will be, he replied. The once skeptical room now felt like a place of possibility. What had begun as a test meant to embarrass him had transformed into a performance no one would forget. Malik had arrived as the outsider, but he left the piano bench as the undeniable star, his talent echoing in the minds of everyone who had doubted him just minutes before. The next morning, Crestwood Academy buzzed with an energy Malik had never felt before. Word of his impromptu performance had traveled faster than a text message chain, students whispered about it in the hallways, teachers discussed it in the staff lounge, and even the janitor gave Malik a knowing nod when they passed in the corridor. It was as if overnight, he had gone from the quiet scholarship kid to the name on everyone's lips. By lunchtime, classmates who had barely noticed him before now crowded around his table, eager to ask questions. Was that all from memory? One student asked in awe. Do you take lessons with, like, a famous pianist or something? Another added. Malik smiled modestly and shook his head. Just my grandma, he said. Every time he said it, pride warmed his chest. Later that week, the school principal personally invited Malik to perform at the upcoming Fall Music Showcase, the most prestigious event in the Academy's calendar. Normally, students audition months in advance for even a small spot on the program, but for Malik, they made an exception. Your talent deserves the biggest stage we have, the principal told him, her eyes bright with excitement. When Malik stepped onto the grand stage of the Crestwood Auditorium that evening, the packed audience greeted him with a roar of applause. Parents, students, teachers, even people he'd never met, filled the seats. From the wings, Malik caught sight of Ms. Dalton and Mr. Peters standing side by side, both smiling with unmistakable pride. He sat at the glossy concert piano, its polished surface reflecting the golden lights of the stage. The hush that settled over the room was familiar now, anticipation tinged with wonder. Malik closed his eyes, remembered his grandmother's encouraging smile, and let the first notes flow. The music rose and fell like a living story, each phrase carrying the same mix of heart and skill that had stunned his classroom days before. Only now, Malik played with an even deeper confidence. He wasn't just proving himself anymore, he was sharing a piece of who he was with everyone listening. When the final note lingered and faded, the audience erupted into a standing ovation. Malik stood, bowing slightly, a quiet smile on his face as cheers echoed off the high ceiling. In that moment, he felt the weight of every doubt, every side-eye, every whispered comment lift away. Backstage afterward, Ms. Dalton approached him. You've reminded me why I teach music, she said, her voice warm and sincere. You didn't just play tonight, you inspired us. Malik thanked her, but inside he was thinking of his grandmother. She had told him to let his gifts speak louder than words, and tonight it had spoken to an entire auditorium. As Malik left the stage to another wave of applause, he knew this was just the beginning. The boy who'd been forced to play the piano to mock him had turned that moment into a masterpiece, and left everyone, once again, speechless. If Malik's incredible talent inspired you, hit that like button and share this story with a friend who loves music. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss more amazing stories of courage and hidden genius. Thanks for watching, and keep believing in your own gifts.